Hey guys, welcome. So this video is about modeling relationship in GraphQL when you are using AppSync and Amplify library. I will give you an example on how do you model one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship and many-to-many relationship in your applications. So throughout this video, I'm going to use one of these example to demonstrate this relationship. So this is one of the very common example. So let's say you have these three entities. You have departments and you have employees and also you have projects. So let's see what are the relationship between departments, employees and projects. So one of the relationship that we are going to map is a department has a manager. Let's see this one. So department has a manager. So that manager is also included in the employees, right? So of course a manager is also an employee. So a department has a manager. So what type of relationship is that? It's a one-to-one mapping because one department has only a one manager, right? And also the second relationship we are going to do is a department has many employees. Of course, a department has many employees. So one department has many employees. So what type of relationship is that? It's a one to many relationship. Or we denote it as one colon m or one colon n, right? And finally, we are going to look at one many to many relationship as well. So that is nothing but a project has many employees. Let's say a project. So we have a project entity. A project has many employees. Let's say many employees are assigned to one particular project. And on the other hand, a single employee can be in multiple projects as well. So one project has many employees and one employee can be assigned to many projects. So what type of relationship is that? That's a many to many relationship. Alright guys, so let's see how do we map this relationship quite easily with Amplify library. Alright, so head over to Amplify library website. So at this particular link. Now guys, in the previous video we talked about Amplify library and GraphQL introduction. So if you guys want to watch it, I will put a link up here. And once you are in the documentation, you should see how to install the Amplify library. So it's basically a simple npm install. And then you can use Amplify init to initialize a project in AWS Cloud. So let's take a terminal and create a new directory called relationships. Cd into relationships. And inside this folder, let's create an Angular application. ng new my app. Well, you can use Angular, React, Vue, or any other front-end framework, but in my case, I use Angular. Yes, I want to add routing, and I'm going to use SCSS. So once your app is created, go into the folder and open it in a code editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code here. Alright, now I open up an integrated terminal and let's initialize a new Amplify project by typing Amplify init. Okay, the editor I'm using is Visual Studio Code and it's a JavaScript application. It's an Angular application. So if you guys like spin up a React application, use React or Vue, in my case Angular. And the source directory, it's src folder and my build file resides in dist/my app. My app is the name of my app and hit enter. Build command is this one, ngserve. Alright. And now it's using CloudFormation to initialize the project. So do I want to use AWS profile? Yes, because I have this particular profile for my YouTube. Alright, so now project is now successfully initiated in the cloud. So now I can add API. So let's add our GraphQL API by typing amplify add API and hit enter. Choose GraphQL and hit enter again. And API name, I will just choose the default name, my app. And the authorization type, well, I'm going to choose Cognito user pool. And then it asks me, okay, do I need to add the default configuration to the Cognito user pool? I will just select default configuration. If you want, like you can go through the setup and customize the configuration. Now it asks, do I have a GraphQL schema? In my case, I do not. So I will type N and hit enter. Do you want a guided schema creation? Yes. Then it will suggest me like three types of schemas, single object with fields, one-to-many relationship, and fine-grained access. So in this case, I will choose one-to-many relationship. That will give me a blog post schema. And do you want to edit the schema now? I will hit yes. And now it's going to open up the schema file. So minimize the integrated terminal. And so this is the created blog post schema. So in our case, we don't need this one because we have department, employees, and projects. So I will delete it. So let's start building our schema. So first type is department. So what field does the department has? It has an ID of ID. So capital ID is a common type that we denote ID in GraphQL. And department has a name of string. Yeah, that should be it. So our department has an ID and its name. And now I'm going to use a directive from Amplify library called @model. So this @model directive will create a DynamoDB table for department, and also it's going to create all the GraphQL mutation, queries, and subscription for department model or department type. So what is the next entity? So let's create our employee, and let's use the same directive here because we want to create a table for employees as well. So our employees also has an ID and a name, and let's add age as well. So now let's add our first relationship. So what is our first relationship? A department has a manager. So in the departments, let's add another field called manager, and that manager is again an employee, right? Now before that, let me just take out this S and keep it single. Sorry about that. So this manager is again an employee. So manager is type of employee. Okay. So we are referencing this type when it comes to manager. So this is ID and string are Scala type in GraphQL, but when you are referencing another type, these are called non-Scala type. So in order to make this a one-to-one relationship, let's add another directive called connection. So we are making a connection on manager to this particular employee type. Now here's what happens. When Amplify compiles this schema with these directives, it's going to create this department table in the DynamoDB, and it's going to create ID attribute, name attribute, and it's going to create another reference for the manager by adding attribute called manager ID. So department table then has a reference to the manager's ID. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to open up the integrated terminal again and hit enter, and then I will type amplify push. So now Amplify is going to compile the code and create a CloudFormation template, and then it create all the resources. So answer yes to all these questions. Alright, so it has given me the GraphQL endpoint, and let me go to AWS console and see the resources that it created. And if I go to AppSync, I should see my new API, my app. And go into that, if you go to the schema, you should see the full schema that it has created. You see, it has added all these input types and mutations, subscriptions, etc. So let's go to DynamoDB as well, because it should create a table for department and employees. So these are my two tables. And also let me go to AWS Cognito, because we are using Cognito authorization. So if I open it in a new tab, I should see my new Cognito user pool. So here's my user pool. So in the AppSync console, let's try to create a query. Let's try to create a department. Now, I first have to log in with the user pool because that's how the authorization happens. So in order to do that, I need to provide the client ID and username and password of a particular user. So let's create a user here. In the user pool, I will click create user, and okay, Manoj F is fine, and I don't need to send any invitation. Add a temporary password, guys, and just untick this one, manoj@test.com, and create the user. Okay, user is created. And now go to app clients, because we need to just copy the client ID and make sure you are not using the one with the secret key, but without the one, this one. So just copy in the client ID. In the AppSync console, client ID, paste that in, and your password and the username. Okay, now I'm logged in as Manoj. Okay, now if you click docs here, you should see your schema. And let's see what are the mutation that I have. If I click mutation link here, I have this create department mutation, right? So let's try to create that one. We'll type mutation create department, and the field name is create department input. So what are the input types? So if you go to create department, you should see the input type is of this particular create department input type. Just click that, should see what are the required field, and I should give the name, and let's call it engineering department. And department manager ID, since I don't have a user created or the employee created, I can't give it yet. So let's leave it blank, and later on we'll update the department. And the create departments outputs are departments. So in the department, I can just print out the ID and the name. Right. So now let's run this mutation. Click this button. There you go, it's created. So let's make a note of the department ID, and I will just copy this and I will put it in a notepad. Okay, so this is the department ID. And guys, let's create an employee as well. Let's create employee. You can just name this one any name, but when you're choosing the field type, make sure to pick the right one. Okay, an input type colon and open braces. If I go to mutation, always use the documentation, it's quite easy. And create employee, you should see the input type is create employee input, and it accepts name and age, right? So name, let's say John Doe, and age 21, and the mutation returns an employee. See, so employee has the name and the ID. I will just print out the name and the ID. Okay, let's close this out and click this one and select create employee. Okay, John Doe is created. Let me just note down these two as well. John Doe ID is this one. Let's create two more employees. Jane Doe of age 28, and create the employee and just note the ID as well here. And also another employee, Manoj Fernando, create employee. Make a note. So now that is created, so let's see if it is updated in our database, right? So if I go to DynamoDB and if I go to department table and into the items, I should see my first department is created. See, department, engineering department. Can you see I still don't have that manager ID. So let's add a manager to our department. So I will go to AppSync, and this time I'm going to use the update mutation. Let's call update manager. So the mutation name, let's see what is that name. Update department. Okay, update department, and as for the input type, okay, update department input. If I go into that, I can individually update these attributes. So in this case, I need department manager ID. So let's add John Doe as our engineering department manager. Department manager's ID. So let me quickly copy John Doe's ID here, paste it in here. Department ID, that will return me the name. Okay, I can just return whatever the values here, and let me just run the update manager mutation. Oh, we got an error because we have to give the ID of the department as well. So department ID that we are going to change is this one. So this is the engineering department. Sorry about that. So of course you have to add the department ID that we are going to update. So make sure to add the department ID here and the department manager ID, which is our John Doe's ID, right? And then run again. All right, so it is updated. So let's see if it is updated. I will click refresh and open this up. You see the department manager ID. So this is how we create one-to-one relationship. Now let's add the other relationships as well. So let's add this one. A department has many employees. I will go to my schema. Now department has a manager, one-to-one relationship, and department has many employees. So let's add another attribute here. Let's call it employees, and that is an array of employee type. So its employees are array of employees. So arrays is denoted with brackets. So we are referencing the employee type in an array because it's a list of employees, right? And let's add another connection here. Now guys, when you add this connection, it works. So when you create one to many relationship, so in this case, department has many employees. When you're creating an employee in the employee table, it should have an attribute called department ID, say department ID, yeah, something like that. So this will reference the department. So every time you create an employee, we should have that particular ID. Now there's a small issue. When you just add employees, it just works. But this particular attribute name, we get it as department employees ID. So it's basically get the type names, department and the employee and the ID, right? Because if you can remember, our manager, it was called department manage ID. Similarly, it will infer a attribute name called department employees ID, right? This doesn't make any sense. So in order to have an attribute that makes sense, let's create a named connection. Now these are unnamed connections. So named connection is quite easy. just add a brackets and type name, and then you can just add any name here. This is basically a label, guys, some reference. So it can be anything. So let me here just call it department employees. And once you are adding a named connection, you have to have another field in the corresponding table. So this is referencing the type employee. So in our employee type, let's add another reference to the department as well. So let's call it department, and it's the type of department. And let's add the same name connection here as well. So we have to do this by directional mapping in order to get this thing working, right? So when you add that, guys, this name could be anything. What changes is the attribute name. So earlier, if we weren't using named connection, the attribute name could be department employees ID. Now it will take the name as employee department ID. So that makes sense, right? Because employee belongs to a department, so employee department ID makes sense. All right. So now let's compile our schema again. So how can we compile it? Take your integrated terminal and type this command amplify API GQL-compile. So this will recompile our schema and update our CloudFormation stack. Now let me reiterate again. Of course, you can take this out and only keep the unnamed connection, right? Because department has many employees. This just works without any doubt, right? But the attribute name is a weird attribute name. So in order to have a meaningful name, something like employee department ID, we need to have a named connection. Okay, it's successfully compiled. Now let's push our changes, amplify push. So once it is completed, let's go back to our AWS console to AppSync console. Maybe you have to just log out and log in back. Now if you take the docs and go to the mutations, let's see when you create an employee, what are the input types? You see, there's the new input type called employee department ID. You see, now the name matches quite fine because employees has a department ID. Right? So let's update our 3 employees with their corresponding department, shall we? So I will go back to the schema and let's use this update employee mutation. Update employee, and the input type is of, let's see, always use the reference. The ID of the employee is, let's start with John Doe ID and employee department ID. So let's add the department, engineering department ID. This is this one, and you can just get the name if you want. And then I will update the employee. All right, it's successfully updated. Similarly, let's update the other 2 employees as well. Jendo, just change the employee ID here. Don't change this one because we are adding to the same engineering department. So that is the department ID, and run the update employee again. Okay, Jendo is updated. And finally, Manoj, employee ID, change it and run the mutation, update employee. Okay, now it is updated. Now let's try to query a department and see. So if the department has these employees, get department. What is the query? So this time it's not a mutation, it's a query. Click query and get department query. Get department and ID. So we have to provide the ID of our department, and that gives me a department. Click on the return type here, department, and you get all this information, right? So let's print out the department name and the manager. So manager again is a type of employee. You see, manager is another type of employee. If you go into that, you can just print out the manager's name and go back here. So what else do we have? We have employees as well. So employees, and employees are a type of employee connection. It's a type of connection, and it has these items array because employees are a list of employees and items are list of employees. Click into the employee and everyone has a name, and let's print out their age as well, why not? So now let's execute this query. I will hit play button and click get department. There you go. So we got the data back. So our department name is engineering department, our manager is John Doe, and these are the employees. Employee 1, 2, 3, Manoj, Jane Doe, and John Doe. Nice. Now I want to show you one other thing. If we go to DynamoDB table and do a refresh on this, and if you go to employees table, first note that you have the employee department ID attribute. And secondly, if you go to indexes, you should see it has created a global secondary index on employee department ID key. So DynamoDB has internally created this index on the employee department ID so that it can query using the employee department ID efficiently. Awesome. So now let's add the many-to-many relationship. So what is our many-to-many relationship? It's basically a project has many employees. An employee can be assigned to many projects. So let's go to our schema. Now we need to have another type called project. And it's also a model. We need to have a DynamoDB table and all the mutations and queries. And it has a ID, project ID, and let's say there's a project name as well. That should be enough. So what should be the relationship? A project has many employees. Yeah. So we can simply add employees of type employee array. Make sense? So employees, it's an array of employee, right? And we can just make this as a connection, right? If you want, like, we can create this named connection as well. And how about the other side? Employee can be assigned to many projects. So employees also can have multiple projects, right? So if you just type projects and it's a list of project, we can just make this as a connection as well, right? So we have both the relationship. Employee has multiple projects and project has multiple employees. But guys, when you are mapping many-to-many relationships, and if you are only using two tables, when there are a lot of data, the relationships get quite messy. Because you see, the employee table has the relationship to the projects, and the project has relationship to the employees, and one employee could be in multiple projects, and one project has multiple employees. So you have to like have so many number of records in these two tables. It get quite messy quite fast. So one of the ways that we can like model it in a different manner is using a third table. We can create a third table and create two one-to-many relationships and then achieve this many-to-many relationship. Confusing? Let me just show you. So let's create another table called or type called, let's say, employee projects, right? So when we are naming this table, it could be like employee projects or project employees, whichever makes more sense, right? So in this case, both seems fine. Employee projects or project employees. So let's create a model here. And this particular table also has an ID attribute. And I'm going to take out these two early records, this one and this one. Okay, so we can start with a clean slate. So what are we going to do? We are going to create this particular table, employees projects table, and create two one-to-many relationship, employee table to employee projects table, and another one-to-many relationship from project table to employee projects table. So let's create that, shall we? So employee has multiple projects, and that is the type of employee project, not employee type, but employee project, and it has a connection, and we'll call that connection employee projects. Remember, you can name this anything. And once you create one record here, you have to have a reference record here as well. So let's call it employee because this is the type of employee and the employee type, and let's have the same connection name here. So we created one of the one-to-many relationships. As we have created one-to-many relationship in department and employees, you see this one. Similarly, we created another one-to-many relationship between employee table and employee projects table, right? So we'll do the second one-to-many relationship from projects to employee projects. So project has many employees and that is an array of employee project. Let's add a connection with the name project employees. So let's create the reference attribute here. So that is project because we are referencing the project type, and that is of project type and have the same named connection here. Awesome. So now let's recompile this. Amplify API GQL-compile. Okay, we got no errors. And one other thing, guys, this particular employee projects model, and when we add this particular at model directive, it's going to create all the queries, mutations, subscription, and everything, right? But we are only like adding the records or creating this employee and project reference in this table. We are not going to query anything from this one. So in order to tell Amplify, don't create query types, we can pass additional information with parentheses. Let's say queries null. So it's not going to create any queries, but only the mutations. All right. And let's do another compilation. Okay, it's compiled successfully. Let's do amplify push to push all the changes and like update our resources in AWS. Okay guys, it's updated. So let's go to our AWS AppSync console and let me log out again and log in. And now if you look at the schema and if you go to mutation, you should see create project and update project. That means it has created project type as well. So let's create a project, guys. So I will type mutation, create project, and let's use create project field and input. So what is the input? Click here. So basically ID is auto generated. We just have to give it a name. Let's call it project X. And then let's get the ID and the name. Okay. Execute it, create project. There you go, it's created. And let me take a reference on the project ID. Project X ID is this one. And now let's add Manoj and Jane to this particular project X. So those are the two employees assigned to project X, right? And how do we do that? We are going to create an entry in our employee projects third table. So let's use create employee projects mutation. So I'm going to use mutation add employee to project, and we are going to use create employee projects. And as for the inputs, we have to provide, let's see what are the inputs here, employee ID and the project ID. So employee projects project ID. So what's the project ID? So we are going to associate him with our project X. So let's get this project ID. And who are we going to associate? The employee ID of Jane. All right. So let's get the ID out. So this will assign Jane to our project X. So let's add employee to that project. Okay, so it's added. And let's add Manoj also. So let's get the Manoj ID, and I'm going to add Manoj to the same project, and let's add employee to that project. Okay, great. So let's now query that project and see if these two employees are actually added, right? So let's go to docs again, query get project by ID, get project and ID. So what is the ID? Project X ID here. Okay, and the get project returns a project. So inside the project, what do you have? You have name and employees. You see one-to-many relationship there. Name and employees. Now take a look at the type, guys. These employees are type of employee project connection. Yeah. So if you go into this, you should see I will get a list of employees. So I can just query that items, and these items are of type employee projects. So employee project, we have employee and the project. So let's get the employee again, and I will take the name employee. So it will give me the name of this employee. Hope it's clear. So let me just query the project, get project. Here we have it. So our project X, it has these two employees. So one project can have many employees. So let's see the other side. That means one employee can have multiple projects. So let's add Manoj to another project, shall we? So first, let me just create a new project. I will use the previous mutation. I will call this as project Y, and let's run this one. Create project, so is the one. So I created it. So this is my project Y. Copy the ID here, project Y. Now let's associate Manoj to that project Y. So project Y ID, I already copied it. So let me just quickly paste it here. So this is the ID of project Y and the employee ID of Manoj. So that is this one. All right. And I'm going to execute add employees to the project. Great. Now if we query Manoj, then we should see all the associated projects. Let's query that. Get employee, query name. Let's get employee. Okay, get employee, and basically you need to give the ID of the employee, which is Manoj ID. And now look at the return type. So this is the get employee, and you will get an employee type out. So in this employee type, there are a bunch of things, right? First, we can get the name and we can get the age and the department. Oh, we'll just omit department for now because we are concerned about the projects. So I will type projects, and the project is type of project connection, and going to that you get items, that means list of projects, and each of these are of our third table type, which is employee projects, and inside it we can simply get the project, and project is type of again project, and just get the name. Nice. So let's run this query, and it should return both project X and Y ideally. Let's see, get employee. There you go. So Manoj is part of project X and project Y. Great. So now we have completed all these relationships. Okay guys, so this is what I want to show you in this video, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks.